board meeting, but would it be appropriate to take action on 2017 while still working on earlier? Is that confusing direction for, you know, if to Sandy's point, if we want to take advantage of the task forces that have such a wonderful mix of community members in them already, that are already chewing on a lot of the issues that will feed into how to make a later start time work, can we move on 2017 now, but still look at 15 and 16 too, or is that too confusing?
Well, I think you can. I think you might look at them in different levels. If you're looking at 2015, 16, or 16, those solutions and that's whatever solution might be achieved is going to look different in 2017 because we're going to be fundamentally different as an organization. So you'd be really looking at perhaps two different series of solutions because of how differently we're going to look as a system in 2017 compared to what we're going to look like in 2015, 16. But if the objective is what interim steps can we take that would start moving us in a direction towards 2017, you know, I think there probably are things we could look at, such as expanded 7th period options or other types of solutions that are probably less comprehensive but don't necessarily come with the immediate program impacts. That something more drastic, such as a comprehensive solution for 2015 or 16 would look like. So I mean, we just need to define it a little bit better.
So I came with a list of ideas along that line, if that's okay, if I share that list. Okay, so one is looking at the 1 through 7, 1 through 6, 2 through 7 option. Is that, you know, what does that look like? What are the busing costs? Is that a doable thing? How does that impact our schools? There was a recent study that came out of the University of Minnesota that surveyed, what they did is they looked at 8 specific high schools. They didn't do districts, but it was 8 different high schools across the United States, and that's certainly where a lot of this conversation in the American Academy of Pediatrics have come from, and it's a recent survey. It was done in 2010, 2011, and then 2012, and looking at the impacts. But what I'm focusing on is, of these 8 high schools, 4, after they moved to a later high school start time, added a 0 period. And all 4 of those, there were ones that moved to an 8:30 or later start time. The ones that didn't add 0 period to their day were ones that only moved till 8 o'clock. So I think it would make sense for us to contact those 4 high schools and say, what was the driver that you felt you needed to add as a 0 period to your day? What are we not thinking about? How many kids are taking your 0 periods? How many kids? What classes are you offering in 0 periods? And you know, I can take that on, or any board members that want to work on this. I think just to make sure that we're thinking of all the potential issues that can come up, that here we've got some that were very motivated to have high school start later, and then ended up adding classes that were actually earlier than when they were originally starting. So we want to make sure that we don't go down some road that a problem pops up that we hadn't occurred to us. And I'll echo what Kimberly was talking about earlier, the Hispanic community. I think now we've got we recognize, as Leanne mentioned, that there's a communication gap, and so start talking about how do we communicate and have a meeting with these families and say, okay, here's what this municipal sampling gave us as information. What do you really think? Really tell us what's going on, and start that communication and talking with that. This one's my personal favorite. So the Lake Washington School District is in the process right now putting together a committee to look at a later high school start time and a required 7 periods. So they would mandate 7 periods. So they're in the process of doing that right now. The Seattle School District is also in the process of putting together a committee to look at later high school start times. Now, you all know sports is not really my knowledge area, but from the things that I have attended, it appears that those 2 districts are the largest supplier of the teams that we compete against. Right? Yeah. Okay. That's pretty good. I recognize that. So it seems like we should be talking to those two school districts and creating subcommittees within our three districts and say, because we know sports is going to get negatively impacted. And so start talking with them of, okay, how do we're all moving, trying to do this. How do we all work together to still provide, because we know if we cut footballs, that'll be the end of, be tarred and feathered and rode on a rail.
We were invited to join in that work and we declined because we were doing this work. We had already started.
I know.
I'm sure that
What work
I'm sure Bellevue, Mercer Island, Lake Washington, I believe, is involved in it as well. So
I'm
I'm
familiar
sure
with
the
that.
invitation is still open. Well, we
Well, that's-
never discussed it.
I have no memory of that, but I definitely know
Okay, I
sports
don't
members
remember
do.
this, so.
So, okay, well, that's great. So that sounds like that's something that we
Original solution?
Yeah, and by the way, Lake Washington, it's 2017 is their target. Seattle's got $250,000, so there may be snacks at their meetings.
I didn't Seattle spending $500,000, if that's what was on the news, to do
Yeah.
to actually do a research day to see whether they're even going to do it.
They set aside that amount. I don't think
So there
they
may
know
be
what they're
snacks.
spending.
Yeah,
But the point is that, you know, there's this window right now that we should be taking advantage of, getting involved with. And then I guess just my last little point is that there were a couple articles in the Seattle Times, later high school start times, how 70 districts have done it, and then I made copies because I didn't want to, you know, break any rules here, so I didn't want to confuse anybody. But there were two separate ones. One's titled 70 School Districts, How They've Done It. And then the other one's Want Later School Times for Teens, Here's How It's Done. And it's focused on the Fairfax County Public Schools in Virginia, which is a humongous district that has made this work. And so there's kind of two takeaways. One, it talked about for Fairfax County, it took them 2 years to get to this point, and there was a lot of community engagement and planning and meetings. And then the other is they kind of did some bullet points in the article that's on the front that are required to get there. The districts that have succeeded, what they have that is in common. They've received strong and vocal support from superintendents and school boards that work well together and can tap a deep reservoir of public trust. They've taken enough time to hear from everyone who will be affected by changing start times, especially students themselves. And I know we haven't done that at all. And then communicate information to everyone in a timely, accurate, and appropriate manner, including translation and interpretation for families who don't speak English. And again, that's I think we recognized already that that's an area we need to work on. So those are the ideas I think.
You know,
Excited to share.
I would
I'm
add,
in
just to
favor of
piggyback.
ideas that don't drag it out to the extent that we have to do it in 2017. I want to reiterate that I would like to hear what we can do in 15, 16, and 17 compared.
So just to thank you. Just to piggyback on what you said, one of the opportunities that I saw in this too is that one of the barriers for me has been, I don't like the idea of student athletes getting out of their academic classes in order to go compete. And this gives us a great opportunity to talk to the other districts who are, like you say, also talking about later start times to see what can be done about this start times. I know it's not the WIA, but it is the conference that we compete in. Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a really important conversation of how to structure it so that all of our students across the districts are not having to get out of school, because that's unacceptable to me. I mean, I don't think I don't think that supports academic achievement, and I object to that on those grounds.
I'm not sure that there's a study that shows that. Like, we have a study that shows us that a later start time does have an impact on
Right.
academic achievement. So I would say that the later start time is not something that you can hijack with student athletes getting out early.
So I think I've stated already that I'm in favor of a later start time beginning in 2017 with an option of a 2 through 7 period that would give them an opportunity to sleep in later. But I do want to read from the American Pediatrics Report where it says, improvements in academic achievement associated with delayed start times have been somewhat less consistently demonstrated. In the Minnesota, this is 644 of the American
Do we
Pediatrics
have that?
report. I have it, yeah. In the Minneapolis study, grades showed a slight but not statistically significant improvement, and standardized test scores were not increased overall compared with those before the start time change. I also want to note another,
Janet, which column is that in?
it's in the third column, about halfway down.
Thank you.
um,
I see it.
Improvements in, yeah. That's in the American Pediatrics report. Also in there is, they do acknowledge, they say, moreover, the logistical considerations in implementing delayed school start times in middle and high schools are far from trivial. I think that they are calling out some of the things that have been in my mind for the last few years too. It should also, and again on page 646, middle column, halfway down, it should also be emphasized that delaying school start times alone is less likely to have a significant effect without concomitant attention to other contributing and potentially remediable factors, such as excessive demands on school students' time because of homework, extracurricular activities, after-school employment, social networking, and electronic media use. I think if you read the whole report, you saw that it was not the end-all, be-all solution to student sleep problems, that there are others that are embedded in that as well. So again, at the bottom of that column, it says, thus education and community engagement are equally key components in increasing the likelihood of success. And so those are contributing factors to why I think 2017 is an ideal time with the opportunities to mitigate the early start time for families that find that important. And I'm not reading that and saying that that's a barrier to doing it. I've been saying that I am in favor of a later start time, but I think that there's more information in there that speaks to doing it in a way that is thoughtful and step by step in making sure all of the answers and questions and answers are addressed.
Thanks for clarifying, because it did sound like you were just cherry picking pieces out that
Yeah.
somehow were negative or in conflict.
Not at all. I think that what we have heard has been cherry picking parts of the report that support later start time. I think there is definitely data. They're clearly in their recommendation is clearly in support of it, and I agree with it. I'm just saying that's not the only thing that was in that report. And I think there are other things that are in there that are valid and important to consider as well.
So I think anytime you're looking at anything, there's lots of variables that go in, so I appreciate you pointing that out. The Minnesota report I had brought up at one of our board meetings, remember? And I think that you had told me, Larry, that we were going to send that out to, I thought Jan had said that she was going to send it out because I know people had seen that report, and it is a very, very good report. And it does give the 8 different scenarios with how they implemented this at all the different schools and there's been another, a more recent study done, I believe in 2013, that I think that this same study, and I don't have it right in front of me, but I think that there was another study done on top of that either extended that study or it might have been a separate, but it was a Minnesota
It's
study.
It's Kyla Wallstrom, who's the primary researcher at the University
There
of
was an
Minnesota.
update in
She's done-
2013, I
Yes,
believe.
and I believe we've sent that out, and that may be
You
the
think
one that's
that's
being
what you're
referenced.
Because I know that
The updated version?
that was the one that I was going off. That's what I was using before the American Pediatric Association came out. I was basing my position on late start based on, not just based on that study, but that was one of the studies that I
She's
brought to the
probably
board.
done the most commonly referenced research around this.
So one thing that I do think, and maybe this is what, in kind of closing this gap as far as where do we go from here and how do we make scenarios for 15, 16, 17, is I think a lot of times when we are looking at implementing transportation or different challenges that have faced our district, we look at like school districts and size and different you know, we look for things that are similar in other school districts as far as size, student population, then we go, what are they doing in that school district? I remember we've had some of those presentations looking at comparable school districts and how are they implementing things. So maybe that's one way to do this is if this study or different, as Sandy was suggesting, but I'm saying taking a little bit different direction, looking at schools that have already implemented Late Start that are similar to our school district. How have they implemented it? How have they managed their programs, the impact to their programs? How many, you know, how are they doing transportation? And maybe being able to look at those and come up with scenarios for 2015, 16, 17, kind of as a directional piece. Because I think there are schools that are doing it where there is information out there. And I was looking at those too, and I was having more of a hard time of being able to know which schools were more like ours, having that actual information, so I didn't want to mislead, and you're not doing that, but I didn't want to bring a bunch of research and then not really know.
So I think the issue is really, it really comes down to the program and the service level you want to provide. I mean, how they're doing transportation the same way we are. I mean, I at least appreciate that our conversation has evolved beyond the point of this being a transportation issue. It's really not a transportation issue, it's a program and resource issue. And so I think that there might be things we can learn from those districts, but it's still going to come back to what are the menu of programs and services we want to operate in our school district, and how are we willing to prioritize those in such a way that we can start high school at X time within the day and provide transportation within X amount of budget. You know, I mean, those are.
So I think what I hear John saying, and I'm feeling the probably similarly, and similarly to what I hear everyone saying is, except I think we're more on the 2015 road, you know, is let's look at the different scenarios. Like, I would be willing to have a document in front of me that showed if we, and I'm not proposing this, if we cut out band, if we cut out this, if we had to reduce time, if we had to move teachers, what does that look like? Like, I don't know that as the board, and maybe I'm wrong on this, that we need to prioritize what those things are. I think we need to see different scenarios of what it looks like to prioritize those things. And then we know what the programs are, so what does it look like?
I think what you.
I think that, I think Larry has suggested that taking it to the reconfiguration committees, that they would look at what could be moved and saved versus cut drastically.
Yeah, cut price not the
But
right term.
what kind of a scenario you could, a best case scenario.
Sure.
And that's what I was looking for.
Sure, and I would agree with that, and I think, from my perspective too, an important step on the front end of that would be for the board to be able to clearly articulate, are there things in your mind that are not movable objects? That must, whatever we end up with at the end of the day, these things must be a part of our programs and services. We should know that on the front end, and then presume that everything else is flexible. And that's going to give us the best opportunity of being successful. Because everything that's in motion, all the programs and services are tied to somebody for whom they're really important.
Is that really and you guys concur, is that really a board role to decide what are the priorities of the program?
Well,
I think it helps with direction.
it certainly can be.
To understand the impact.
I will
of the
say
decision?
if you tackle things like elementary band or orchestra, or if you tackle things like 9th grade academy shuttles,
Or the
you are
higher
going to
kind?
have those constituent groups at your level, guaranteed.
Yeah, I'm just asking.
And so, you know, you can say that this can all be administratively driven. You have to be able to follow through with that then in the face of constituent groups who will come forward appealing to you to undo whatever changes we may put in place to achieve the end of a later high school start time.
I'm sure all the board members received a letter from a constituent that came from California where he stated that, and not to take the conversation back to transportation, that busing wasn't a part of the things that were offered in their program.
And as we've discussed past, actually, our basic ed busing is not a legal requirement. We must transport special education students. We do not need to provide transportation for basic education students. So again, these are the drivers that I think would be really helpful for us to unpack in a subsequent conversation to understand clearly what are the box within the board is comfortable operating or having us operate in order to meet your end of achieving a later high school start time.
The box is pretty open,
I
but what
understand.
will make it
I
happen
understand that.
in
I think that's
2015,
but I think that's a
I
conversation for all boards.
would also like those committees comfortable and our staff comfortable with programming offerings. I would like to hear that they feel that we're not just tossing everything out because we can, or whatever. Certainly, and I trust our staff to have that mindset in terms of how they look at the programs and what we're offering.
You know, I think our approach would be that anything that was untouchable is untouchable, and so those then become the drivers along with the driver of a later start time, and then everything is flexible that we know is important, we would turn over every stone to figure out how we could do it differently, if possible, in order to still continue to provide quality program and services. But knowing on the front end sort of what those parameters are is critical, I think, to our success. We're going to be making, even without a change in start time, we're going to be making tremendous changes in our system as we approach 2017. And you know, we just don't have the time to flounder around and then realize we've gone down a dead end and we've got to regroup and we've got to go, you know, kind of back to the drawing board. That's just not going to be productive.
But you have your time to do those 15, 16, 17 on those committees, 8 and 8:30.
Is that what the board
I
is?
don't.
Well, I
know
think
if
what
that's
Larry's
the case.
asking is that he can't give that response until we give him the priorities.
Well,
Am I understanding that
but
correctly?
you are asking that we give you the priorities. Like you could look at it and give different scenarios,
So
but you're
I'm-
asking for us to give you the priorities.
I'm saying that from my mind, and I'm going to defer to people who know a whole lot more about this than I do. If the direction was high school has to start at some later time in 2007, in fall of 2015, our path to getting there is programmatic. It's not realistic to presume we can take possession of 50 to 60 new buses and hire and train drivers and figure out storage and servicing and all that. It's going to be, do we change sequence of start times by levels? Do we look at modifying or eliminating programs? That would be our path to get there by 2015. That will, as I think Janet just read, I mean, that communication and engagement piece is really critical. There are people who would be impacted in that who probably aren't necessarily paying attention to the conversation at the level that they should be, thinking that they may be impacted. So
I'm going to say, I'm going to recap.
I would also like the buses figured into it. I don't want it just to be, well, what will we slash and burn programmatically? I would like also bus purchases to be figured into that. What would it, how many buses would it take? If it's impossible to get brand new ones, can we lease them? Can we buy used ones? What would it take and how we could get to that end?
And is there board consensus for that particular piece? I think what I'm hearing is that we want an overview of 2015, 16, and 17, maybe from a higher level, without the specifics, and then from that point, we drill down and get into the conversation about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Is that what I'm hearing in general from people?
That's fine with me as long as it doesn't exclude pieces of information at the higher level, and I would like it to include all of the scenarios.
it's just as you know, I'm sure you're aware. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated than that. If we were to use, say, our transportation vehicle fund reserves to purchase new buses, how we accumulate those reserves is from a state depreciation schedule that's intended to help us replace buses when they end their useful life. So if we're using those funds to buy new buses, then we also have to be thinking about, as buses start cycling out and need to be replaced, then what are the resources we're going to use to replace those? So it's, you know, it's a multifaceted challenge.
So I've asked Cindy to put up that mock schedule for a 2 through 7 period. The first one is Bothell, and you can see the second one is it's a mock, it's an approximation, but you can see what the result of that would be.
So when you say 2 through 7, students would have a choice, because I don't have a high school, so I'm clarifying. Students would have a choice to take a first period class, and we would bus for the first period class, but we wouldn't bus for the second period class. So they could go 2 through 7, or they could go 1 through 6, is what you're saying.
Well,
So
that's what
if you
I
go
was-
back, to
That's
my,
what I was asking for, is what are the possibilities?
Yeah, that's
What
what
does
I-
that look
yeah.
like?
So I want to clarify what that means, because I don't have a high schooler, so.
Yeah.
so if you go back to my desired outcome,
Yeah.
which is 2017, we make a major change and we identify a later start time as our target.
Well, we were having an open mind before we did that. I mean, if our desired outcome, I already stated 15, but I certainly am open to 3 different scenarios. I would hope that you were too, right?
So can I finish what I was going to say?
You just keep framing it that way.
So I will, so for me, I will say that it doesn't feel reasonable to make a wholesale system change, but I'm always open to new information. If that perspective changes because of the information that's presented, then I'm totally open to that. In the interim, my belief at this moment in time, this meeting that I've been preparing for, I would say that my desired outcome is to have 2017 be the time for the wholesale change. But in the interim, because there's such strong community support, this might be an opportunity for people to access a later start time if that works better for them. So I just wanted board members to be able to see this. Heather put this together for me yesterday morning. So
Okay.
I just wondered, because I could imagine what it would look like, but I didn't know what it was going to look like at the different high schools.
So you're starting school a different time every day?
Because of block schedule, you don't have the same classes every day, you have different.
Yeah.
So I just wanted you to have a visual of what that might look like.
So I'm looking at, sorry, let me clarify. I'm looking at blocks. Okay, so Inglemoor has the block schedule, Bothell has the traditional. Okay.
And the only purpose for this to be up here is for you to see what I've seen, to give you
Yeah,
information
see
that
what
I
you-
have asked for. So that's the only reason I asked for it to be put up here.
The question was specifically about what's the impact of 7th period on block schedule. And the answer is there really isn't, because 7th period operates on its own schedule. So the impact is really within the 1 through 6 schedule. So on the question of Inglemoor, I presume it would be similar at Woodville High School, that also, they still have their block schedules?
Yes, that's right.
That's correct. That, you go 1, 3, 5, 2, 4, 6 on your block days. So if you don't have a first period that day, you can come in late. But if you have a second period, even though that's the second class of the day, that's going to be the first class of the day on the block day. That's the 2, 4, 6 day. So you're still going to have to start at the regular time. However, on the block day, when it's first period, you get to start an hour later than you normally would in the traditional second, 2 through 6 or 2 through 7 schedule. So it's complicated.
Thank you, Cindy.
So, all I would ask is that in
Yeah,
our.
I'll have that in the Friday briefing this weekend.
I guess what I would ask, just, I'm starting to get a little concerned about it, is that in our pursuit of 2015, we don't jeopardize 2017, and that we've got, like I said, this window closing to make it happen in 2017, and that we don't stall the work that needs to be done to make it happen in 2017 in our effort to make it happen in 2015, because I'm afraid we're going to be here again otherwise a year from now, because we will have not done the work. And then 2017 will not be an option anymore because the window will have closed. So that's what I'm asking, is that we do that work as well.
Do we note it again? There you go. Okay, I don't think that Larry has suggested that that's.
I wasn't worried about Larry, it was you who would have dismissed some of my ideas earlier. It's taking too much time, and so I just wanted to reiterate
with the caveat that if they were meant to take up time to push an outcome, then I have a problem with it. But otherwise, I don't.
Trust me, I have stuff to do. I don't make stuff up just to take time. With full plate, I'm doing these because these need to get done so that we make sure the community is on board and that we don't create new problems that are bigger problems in an effort to solve this problem.
So does anyone else have anything to add to it? We'll have a short debrief at the regular board meeting. It's on the agenda, as you saw, where we'll just talk about our takeaways from here.
I just have clarity of where we're going from here. So I'm not clear.
That's
Thank you.
that's
I'm
my-
not clear.
I was gonna ask that
That's where I'm
next.
going next, but I just want to make
Oh.
sure that there aren't any questions that